Good evening. The other day I sent, let me tell you something real quick. When you get to speak and teach and preach, sometimes the lessons that you come up with bring songs to your head as well. And then you send a text message to whoever you think is going to be the song leader and say, these are the songs that you're going to sing on Wednesday night or Sunday or whatever. And usually you get back a response that says yes or okay or whatever. I sent that to Dad, and I've still not heard anything back, but I'm pleased to know that he sang these. That Rock of Ages is or not Rock of Ages, but the Lord giveth and blesseth. I will call upon the Lord. Is I don't know what did we just sing? The first one we sang, y'all all knew it. The second one sometimes can be a little harder to sing, but I'm assuming Dad was okay with it, so he didn't respond. He was, but it was all right. But if you caught anything in the two songs, you caught the word rock both times, and you'll see that in the invitation song, which I think is Rock of Ages, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know. Once again tonight, we've got First and Second Peter. We've got a first and second, so I will I'll be fine tonight. Next week's when I'll be in. When I'll mess it up. So First Peter, though, is what we're looking at tonight. And we are almost to the end. We have made our way through the Old and the New Testament. Ben and I were talking Sunday night after church, and I was telling him kind of what my thought is on what we're going to do afterwards. And I've mentioned it to a couple. We won't get into it too much. But when we finish with this, I think Dad's going to teach 2 or 3 Wednesday nights to kind of okay. So anyway, that's kind of what we'll plan. So I'll take a day or two off from it, but I've been sort of planning for the next one here for a while. But we'll have that. But anyway, we're in First Peter tonight, and more specifically, we're going to be in First Peter chapter 2 tonight, and even more specifically, we're really only going to be looking at about 5 different verses in First Peter chapter 2. First Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 8, and then we will jump off a little bit here and there, but really tonight we're going to talk a lot about rocks, and that's why both of those songs were chosen, and that's why Rock of Ages will be our invitation song. But we're going to be talking about rocks, and as you can see here, the title here comes from the lesson, from the reading, which is Jesus Christ described as the chief cornerstone. And I got a couple of things that I want us to think about right here beforehand. So I just want to talk for a minute or two. This is not necessarily all, it doesn't necessarily all have to be religious talk here in these first few questions, but I do want you, there is a religious undertone maybe to it as well. But some things to consider. First of all, why is Jesus referred to as a living stone? And that's something that we will be looking at a little bit tonight. But why do you think Jesus is referred to as a living stone? Okay, so Jesus is alive, and then our salvation is based upon the foundation of him. So living stone, I guess you could put it that way. Living stone, sometimes you'll see that as a last name. I believe Dr. Livingstone was the explorer that was lost in Africa for some time, and they went and found him. You'll see it now. It's more common to see the name Livingston, which is also a name of a town in Rockcastle County as well. But you may know some people who have that last name, that E, the stone off the end of it sort of disappeared. Second question, in what way are we priests? And what sacrifices can we offer that are pleasing to God? We talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the role of the priest and then the role of the high priest. That was an Old Testament teaching. What way are we priests today? Okay. We all can approach God. Sure. There was in the Old Testament, there was sort of an established hierarchy of you did this and somebody else did that and then somebody else did that. But we are priests. We have access to God today. What is our access to God through? Who's our mediator? Jesus. And how do we approach, or how do we communicate with God? That may not be the best word, but through prayer, through prayer. So we're all priests, okay? And so in the Old Testament, the priests would offer sacrifice, and you may remember when we studied about it, blood of bulls and goats, and there were specific things that had to be sacrificed. What sacrifices can we offer today, me and you, priests, that are pleasing to God? So those offerings and those alms that we give, that's certainly one method of sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice because however much money that you give, if we think about it in a financial sense, is money that you aren't using for something else. And I mean, if you give $5, you can probably find a place to use $5 in your budget, or $15 or $50 or $500. You could find a place to sub that in. So that's a sacrifice that is given. And the idea being that I believe that this could be used better by the church than it would be ways that we can sacrifice. What are other sacrifices we can offer that would be pleasing to God? Fruit of our lips. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. What else? Yes. Okay. Any other sacrifices? There's plenty of things that can be listed, and for different people, it may be a different thing as well. Third question: what is a cornerstone? This is maybe not as important today as it used to be. The methods of building are a little bit different, but there's still a premise here that exists. What is a cornerstone? It is. Kind of builds off of that. Absolutely. It's what you measure off of. It's what you use. A lot of times you'll see it in old buildings, the cornerstone, kind of the bottom corner, obviously because it's cornerstone, but you'll see a date. Sometimes it's chiseled onto that as well. And it may be the name of a church or a school, or it may be the name of if it's a farmhouse, they may have named the house or whatever, and it might say 1820 or 1912 or whatever it would be. And that it's kind of a significant, like this was built at that time, maybe. But what is the cornerstone's purpose? Okay. Right. Right. So it's got to be stout and sturdy, but it's what you're going to measure off of, like Melvina said there as well. So keep that in mind here throughout this evening. Right. Right. I actually want to hold on that last question. You can look at it. Why is Jesus called a rock of offense and a stone of stumbling? But we'll see that a little bit later. So I want to go into it just a little bit. This is 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. This is our scripture reading here for this evening. Connie, do you care to read 1 Peter 2, verses 4 through 8? All right. Now we can go a little bit further, but I'm thinking about rocks here this evening. So we're going to stop with that one right there. This is not the only time that we see a rock or a stone made reference to. First of all, in the reading there, that there is, if you're in your Bible, it's probably indented or it maybe written a little bit different in verse. That comes from Isaiah chapter 28 in verse 7. There's a little inset there that comes from Psalm 118. And then in verse 8, there is a part there that comes from Isaiah chapter 8. And so there's some references back to the Old Testament in this stone method. But there's a lot of references to rock and stone in the scripture. And I've got 4 Old Testament rock and stone references right here. So I want to look at each of these 4 here before we go any further. The first one is Psalm chapter 18 and verse 2. Psalm 18 and verse 2. Ben, you could read that first one.
The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God, my strength in whom I trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my strength.
All right. So we see the word rock right here. The Lord is referred to as his rock. This is David writing right here, but the Lord is referred to as my rock and then my fortress. We'll talk a little bit about a fortress here in just a second as well. 2 Samuel 22 and verse 47. Melvina, do you care to read that? That second song that we sang this afternoon is pretty much a straight word for word taking from 2 Samuel chapter 22 right there. The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock. I think the song says, blessed be the rock. Let God be exalted, the rock of my salvation. And mom mentioned that just a moment ago. You can see that rock mentioned as well. All right, Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 14. Mom, do you care to read that one? Okay. And so this is what we just read. I think Connie just read that just a moment ago in First Peter, but the same thing, Isaiah chapter 8 in verse 14. It'll be a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. So the first time now we actually see rock used in a negative sense compared to the first two. And the last one, Isaiah 28, 15 and 16. Boo, do you care to read that one? And so we've seen that reference as well. So I wanted you to see sort of those references that are in First Peter that are that show up here as well. So tonight, in a sense, I have titled it "Thoughts on Stones" here. So I've got some questions that are on the board. I got a few things I'm going to go through as well. Yes, ma'am. Sure. It absolutely does. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But we think about the same rock that can hold a house up is also the exact same rock that can knock you over, that you can trip over, that you can be damaged or hurt within. So what do you think of when you think about a stone? It's not a religious question. What do you think about when you think about stones? Generally hard. Most of the time. Sandstone, one that's not necessarily too hard, but for the most part, something like that. Okay. That's true. So they're all at your house. All right. Connie knew what she was when she sold you that land. She knew what she was doing. All right, I'll take this one. You have that one over there. All right. So often uses figurative language to refer to himself. He also said that he described himself as the living water. He also refers to himself as the bread of life. Why do we speak like this? Why do we talk like this? Why do we describe ourselves as stones or as bread? You can relate to it. Those are things that people can relate to there along. But these are reference points to specific qualities that people have within them. And so Jesus was no different than maybe us in those ways that he described himself. He had to describe himself to people who needed to be able to understand it, needed to be able to grasp it. Now, we said just a moment ago, a stone is something that is hard and solid. Almost every case. There are a few types of stones that aren't, but for the most part, they can be very, very hard. We'll put it this way. How many of you would like to be hit by a stone tonight? But what if it's just a little one? What if it's just a little gravel? No, probably not. Even the smallest things would hurt, would harm, would be damage to us. Now they're used for flooring and foundations. For what reason then? Why do we use a stone to build off of? Because they're strong and they can take a whole lot. Right? Have you ever tried to break a stone? Have you ever used a hammer or a mallet or something to try and break it? Some of them are easy, but sometimes it's not too easy, right? Sometimes you can pound on that all day long and it won't nothing come off of that. They're solid. And so you want to build off of something like that because I would like my structure to stand for a while, right? In comparison, think about the story of the wise man and the foolish man, what they built their houses on. But they provide a strong support, and they are also extremely durable. Now, most stones also don't change a whole lot. It's really interesting to look at stones, and it's looking at rocks and look at erosion and how over time. And one way you can see this is something like a waterfall. Because if you see an old picture of a waterfall, and what's hard about this, we only have pictures that go back now almost 200 years, but you can see drawings or descriptions, but that waterfall used to fall over right here. But there's always going to be rock underneath it. There's the riverbed, and then there's the stone that it's falling over. But over time, that will gradually work its way back. But none of you have ever went to Cumberland Falls and said, wow, it's way farther back than it was the last time I was here. It's a very gradual process. It doesn't change too much. Now think about other things. How many of you have trees in your yard that are way taller right now than when you planted them? Anybody got that? And probably not that long ago that you planted them. There were two trees, Dad knows one will tell, there's two trees that were on the corner of our house in Lancaster. And I remember when we planted them. And now, there's not even grass under them. They're grown together. They've gotten so big. And that's been about it was 1995, I think, 25 years, something like that. But it's not been that long ago, something like that grows. What about flowers? Do flowers change? You're seeing flowers probably change day to day, right? If you ever went outside and that flower wasn't bloomed yesterday, and it was green yesterday and it's orange today. So those are things that change over time. What about stones, though? Do they change? Yes. Uh-huh.
I thought to myself, probably the last person that held this in their hands was a Native American.
Right.
I never thought.
That's probably true. I'd say that's probably true. Yep.
But it hadn't changed. A lot of times
Right. Right. That's a really good point. But a stone is about as stout, about as unchanging as anything. And Jesus is described in the Bible as being the same when? Yesterday, today, and forever. Well, we can't really say that about your trees in your yard. We can't really say it about the flowers. How many of you have flowers in the yard that will be dead here in a couple months, right? And they may come back again next year, or you may have to do the work to bring them back again next year, whatever it might be. Jesus is described as a rock, and a rock is in many ways the same yesterday, today, and forever as well. So we talked a little bit about fortress there on one of the quotes. Building a fort or a protective area of stone would make a whole lot of sense. There are buildings out here or places out here, significant historical places that have had to be rebuilt. The wall at Fort Boonesboro, The wall at Fort Herod, the wall at Fort, none of those are real. Why are those wooden fort walls not real? Let me rephrase. They're real. They're made out of wood. They're not original. Why is the wall, the original wall of Fort Boonesboro, not there? They decay. But there are stone castles and stone fortresses, stone walls in places that are there even now. If you drive 52 from Lancaster to Danville, there's a stone wall right before you get into Danville, a rock wall that's been built. I don't know how old it is, but I guarantee it's really old. Mm-hmm. Working on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so those stone walls have always been used to protect things. Well, God is often referred to as a rock or a refuge. Now let's think about refuge for a second. What does it mean, refuge? If you're searching for refuge, what does that mean? You're looking for a safe place. Why do you want to go behind the stone wall rather than the wooden wall? All right, it's a lot stronger. It's going to protect you a whole lot more. Okay, they're durable. They're resistant to sort of damaging blows or whatever it would be. I don't know if you've ever done this. I've never done this because I've never had anything. But think about like a sword. If you were to take a sword and hit a rock with it, what's going to happen? It's going to hurt you. The closest thing I can imagine is when I play baseball, sometimes you'd hit a ball and you wouldn't hit it just right. It hit like closer down to your hands. And the ball might go somewhere, but your arms are just viral just the whole way through because it's just shaking you up right there because that is sturdy and powerful. You're feeling the brunt of that, not the rock or the stone or whatever it would be. That rock is stronger than metal or what have you. Now, one last thing here before we move on just a little bit further. How many of you have ever heard the term pillar of strength? You ever heard that? So we sometimes view people in our lives as pillars of strength. You don't have to say it out loud, but who is a pillar of strength to you? No, go ahead, jump in. Yeah. Right. Yes. So building off of that, because I think Connie kind of answered it right there. What is a pillar of strength? A tower. Absolutely. And so we have people, and who is and I don't want this to be a religious question, but do you have somebody in your life, a human being that you would refer to as your rock or your pillar of strength, kind of the way Connie's son referred to her? You probably do. Probably don't have a lot of people like that. We have some that are like that. We know what a pillar is, right? Think about what those big columns that hold up houses or buildings or whatever, but they're designed to do a whole lot of work. You can lean against that. And what's the guy in Forrest Gump telling him? He said, "You lean against me, and I'm gonna lean right back against you like that," right? Well, that's kind of how those pillars of strength are. Emotional times, physically difficult times, we can lean on those people, right? Go ahead. Sure, absolutely. Sure, it is. Absolutely. So, what about then a pillar of strength? Not a human being that maybe live with or that is your neighbor or you've known your whole life, but for a Christian, who's our pillar of strength? Jesus. Okay, he's unchangeable. We already established that, right? Unshakable, because that's what we want with some kind of protection. He's or some kind of strength. He's protector, our shield and protector. We even read that as well, our safety and security. So, how do we use pillars of strength? We lean on them. Okay. Lean on them, look to them for advice, count on them. So, how do we do that with Jesus? How do we lean on Jesus? Our faith.
By claiming and resting on his promises that he's given us in the Bible.
Okay. Uh-huh. Sure. Absolutely. And so we have this ability. What's the song? I feel like I reference songs a lot, but leaning on safe and secure from all alarms, right? So that ability to sort of lean on this rock that is Jesus. Uh-huh. Right. Yes. We're not talking about that, but that's a good thing to refer back to because that was the strength of the statement that was made. It was not, well, and sometimes we make statements that are a little more gravel, maybe a little more sand than they are rock. I'll do that if I can. Or I'm not real stable on that comment, but other people can make a comment that's much more sturdy, and that's what Peter was doing right there. All right, so let's go just a little bit further. This stone, which is Jesus that we're talking about here, should have been the foundation of Israel and all believers, but what did they do? They rejected him. And it's easy for us to look back and say, well, the children of Israel, they rejected him. But does Jesus get rejected even today? And every time on the timeline in between, Jesus has been rejected. He's been dismissed or said no thank you or kicked off or whatever it might would be. So when you're rejecting something, in many ways, you might just, but if somebody was building a house and it was available for them and they rejected it, what's going to happen to that house over time? It won't last. Those of you that have any knowledge of how government and contracts work know that they're always going to pick the cheapest thing. It's a funny story, famous story, but the astronaut said, when they was going through space, all they could think of was everything on this spaceship was built by the bidder that was able to get it, right? Well, they're doing that to try and save money. And when we're building something, we might want to save a little money. We have to, where can I cut my costs, but where do I need them? But do I want my foundation of my house to be where my costs are cut? Not at all. What's going to happen to my house if my cost cutting is there? That's something that's going to have to be replaced, repaired pretty quickly. The girl that I work with, whose house got hit by a tornado back in December, they've had a hard time getting it redone. There's been a lot that goes to it, and part of it is the house that they live in is kind of a 3-part house. And they added on, and it's been added on again. And she said that one of the things that was damaged was where their front porch is. And that porch had broke away for the main part of the house. I don't think that porch was original there. And she said, the builder said, well, we probably don't need to fix this. And she's like, I think we probably do need to fix this. I don't know if I like the idea of my front porch falling away and it's like, it'll be all right. Nothing to worry about there, right? You want that sturdiness that's there. You don't want to reject that. But why do people reject Jesus as the chief cornerstone? Okay. So it kind of gets in the way of the things that we want to do, right? It kind of gets in the way of those kind of things. So instead, you got to build it on something, right? I mean, you can't just go out and stick a piece of wood on the ground and say, well, this is where my house is. You got to build it on something. So if you're not building it on Jesus, then what do you build it on? Okay. Sure. All right. So I have written down here that house or they build their lives on earthly materials or they build their lives on pursuits. Think about some of these for just a second. Tell me if you know anybody that's built their lives on the pursuit of money, respect, fame. But all those things do what? They pass away. Right now, Boo was telling me just a moment ago about a man that she's reading about who was one of the wealthiest mine owners in the world. It ain't a single person in here would know his name. And when was it, 1880, something like that? I mean, that's not been that long ago, right? 140 years. You'd think you might know somebody that we could name, and you all wouldn't know who that was ever. And this is maybe the richest man in the world at the time. Well, why is it that we sometimes get wrapped up in those things when long term, there's no evidence that any of those things survive. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's all gone. So why do we build our hopes on the ever drifting sand, as it were? Uh-huh. Yeah.
Sometimes we're deceived by men. People are gullible to some degree. People hear what they want to hear.
Sure.
The word of Christ, a lot of times, is not the message they want to hear because, contrary to what TV preachers will tell you today, Jesus did not say this is going to be a bed of roses,
Sure.
cakewalk, and money running out everywhere.
Sure.
That's not what Jesus said. Jesus, take up your cross and follow me, and I'll help you carry your burden.
Right. Right. Sure. Any other thoughts? Well, if we think about like Christianity, we've spoke about this before, that as a Christian, there are rewards. There are things that we see. There are things that we enjoy. But as a Christian, when is the ultimate reward? At the end, heaven, but you're dead then, right? So we don't really have anybody who can come back and tell us what heaven is like, right? Maybe it'd be nice. I don't know if it'd be nice or not. But if somebody could, then, but what's money and fame and respect? When do you get those kinds of things? All your life. So you're always sort of reveling in that, as it were, right then. So it's much easier to be interested in those things because I get them right now instead of what? And having to wait. But not only is heaven after I'm gone, is there a wait for it? What do I have to do in the process? I have to work and I have to sacrifice, right? So it's like I get all the hard work, but none of the reward until the end. Well, people that are chasing after money and fame, they're working hard too, but they're getting their reward right then. So why then do we pursue Christianity? Why do we pursue a reward later rather than a reward right now? Because eternity is forever, right? And those people that owned the mansion that 37 years later, they sold every bit of it, it's all gone. And those people are sadly forgotten. Those folks are. We said a minute ago, though, this rejection shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise. It's happened throughout time, right? It's not just today. It wasn't 140 years. Every time throughout history it's happened. People have rebelled constantly against God. But God holds us, as you would say, as we maybe should say, wants to hold us to a higher standard than that of sinful people. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Well, we all think that, right? We've talked about that before. I'm the smartest person about everything, right? You're okay, but I'm way smarter about all this stuff. But we fall into that trap about everything, and we can fall into that with God as well. Right. Sure. Mm-hmm. Right. No, sure. Yeah. But that's really difficult to look at a big picture, and I deal with this with students a lot of times. Getting students to look at the big picture is difficult. But remember when you were 18, or for my kids, 16, and think about, most of us weren't thinking very big picture when we were 16 or 15 years old as well. All right. So all this stone, we're still talking about stone, was rejected by men. He's the most precious and the most valuable in God's sight. What's the most valuable stone to God? His son, Jesus. And the second point up there is just a short slide, but I just want you to think about it. God's opinion is the one that matters most, right? God's opinion. So when God just directs his people to do this or to do that, that's a really good point. That's a good point to make there as well. Others. All right. So in this passage, what we read there, we're referred to as living stones. And we talked about that just a moment ago, but we're followers of Christ, right? That's what Christianity is. You're following Christ. And so we should be taking on Christianity, and we should be taking on characteristics that are Christ-like, right? If you want to be good at something, you may model yourself after someone who is good at it, right? Somebody who does something you want to be good at. You may have done that at work. It may not be somebody famous, but was there somebody that you modeled yourself after work? Somebody who maybe did the job well and you said, I would like to be able to do it like that. You'll sometimes see kids when they play sports, they try to shoot exactly like a certain player. They get a batting stance. Ben talked about that a few months ago. He stood in there like Johnny Bench. He didn't get the results. The best at it. And so if we're followers of Christ, whose characteristics should we take on? Hey, Max. Whose characteristics should we then take on? Those of Jesus. And so you remember those little bracelets, the what would Jesus do bracelets? What was the point of those? When I'm about to do something stupid, oh, what would Jesus do right here? Well, do we always know the answer of what would Jesus do in a situation? We don't. But can we model ourselves trying to make the best decision that we would? I think we could probably safely do that. Okay? All right. So what does it mean that we are living stones? Well, in James 1, it means we're strong in our faith, not blown around, tossed about in the wind. You ever seen a rock get blown by the wind? Not much. Maybe some gravels, right? But even in the biggest of winds, you might see the gravel just move a little bit, kick a little bit of dust up. But it takes a really big wind to blow something around. Now, what about some leaves? We talked about tree branches, that kind of stuff. What about leaves? The minute it barely blows, you get there. I don't know how. There must be a billion branches in the trees behind our house because every time the wind blows, they fall into the ground. We've been there for 7 years. I feel like at some point it's going to run out of those big branches, but they're all still keep falling out. And they're not on our property, but they land on our property there. But it doesn't take much for something like that to sort of blow around. But those rocks are, in many ways, sturdy and immovable. We're supposed to be secure and stable because we build them on Christ. We are stones, as Ben just said a minute ago, stones on a stone, right there. And we are one part or one stone out of a large building of stones, and that's the church, not the physical building. There's a lot of stones that are used to make this building, but we are stones that together sort of build up to make the church. Each of us is to offer up spiritual sacrifices to God. And Romans 12 says that we defines the sacrifice we're to make as a living sacrifice. We're to give our lives to Him. Thoughts? One last thing here. If anybody got comments, though, before we go any further. I feel like I've talked more and you've talked less. I apologize. So the last thing I want to look at is, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this part, but it did say in verses 7 and 8, especially 8, that a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. Now, we've spent almost the entirety of our time tonight talking about a stone as something that's built off of, right? We've thought about houses, we've thought about how immovable, how difficult it is to, the wind can't really blow a stone very well. We can take a hammer and we can't really break it. We take a bat or a sword. It's going to affect us more than it's going to affect them. But maybe the best way to to damage something with a stone is to use another stone. You ever dropped a big stone on a smaller stone? What will happen sometimes? They'll disintegrate. It'll break right there. And so stones can be used to smash. Stones can be used to destroy. And we kind of read here in the Bible that Christ would, if we want to use that word, smash those that rejected, right? What happens to those that reject Jesus? And be cast into the lake of fire. They're gone right there. And so he's going to judge all of those who didn't believe. And not all of us, but all of those, even going way back when. It's not just people today, it's people throughout history that would be judged before that. And after they reject Christ, the Bible says they're appointed to what? We're appointed to die once, and what? And then what? And then the judgment. And so that's where that rejection, if that rejection comes and then your death comes, that's where the judgment comes in. And so that sort of seals the fate, as it were. So we've talked. I wanted to spend more of our time on the positive side of a stone, what we can build off of. But that same stone can be used to stump, can cause, will be the ultimate stone of stumbling or offense or whatever. Isaiah, and then also First Peter. Peter. Sure. We didn't do any kind of historical reference beforehand, but Peter is referred to as Peter, but what was his name? Simon was his name. And that Peter is sort of the name that was in many ways given to him, because Petros, is a word to describe a rock. And that same thing that Boo talked about was that confession he made is upon this confession the church would be built. And so when we talk about Peter, we're talking about somebody who was in many ways mistake prone. We see Peter throughout the Bible doing sort of dumb things, right? We see Peter speaking when he shouldn't have been speaking. Can we relate? Are there times when we probably would be better off to be quiet and we say something? How many of you know what some of your shoe tastes like? You know what it means to stick your foot in your mouth? Maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? We can kind of relate to that, right? Peter sometimes was too impulsive. Do you remember what Peter did to the guard there in the garden? He comes up, cuts his ear off. She said, "Whoa, we don't need to go here just yet." But why do you got to get the sword? Like, the first move is to go straight for the sword right there. Are any of us ever impulsive? Do we ever react first? Sometimes we react before we act, right? Act requires a little bit of thinking. Those people that are in TV shows, that are in movies, that are in plays, they are actors, but they spend a whole lot of time preparing to be what you're going to see on the stage or on the screen. We often spend zero time, right? We react a lot quicker than we do act. And so sometimes, just like Peter was in the garden, we can become a little too impulsive. We can act or react a little too quick as well. Why are those things bad for a Christian? Because other people are watching. But now, is it possible that we can do those things, that we can make those mistakes and still have an opportunity to be successful as a Christian? Yes.
That was maybe sometimes a detriment to it, but also sometimes it was what Jesus needed to do.
It's somebody that could act right there. And if we're making a list of prominent early Christians that we read about in the Bible, we won't go very far down the page before we write Peter's name.
Jesus sent Peter and John to go get the coat and go get that. One of the reasons he sent Peter is because he knew Peter wasn't going to take no nothing. People see Peter, they know that.
Right.
He sent John to kind of keep Peter calm down.
Yeah, good cop, bad cop kind of a situation right there. But I say that because, just to wrap things up here tonight, is that we all make mistakes, right? We all do wrong things. We all are impulsive at times, and we say things too quick or that we shouldn't say, but we can still be successful. We can still be a Christian. We just have to guard against that. And I would hope that as Peter got older, he got a little better at some of those things. And I think with age would come wisdom, and hopefully the same thing would come for us as well. But hopefully tonight you have enjoyed what we've talked about with First Peter. Do we have any questions or anything before we wrap up? Again, remember, next week is 2 Peter, when I will make numerous mistakes about what the book title is.